Welcome to data models. The concept of a data model is quite simple, but data models themselves can get kind of tricky. That's okay, we'll walk you through them. In general, a data model makes machine data easier to use. It simplifies complex data through abstraction, and it groups specific types of data. What do we mean by that? Well, your DevOps group or your operational intelligence group may not know everything that you know about Splunk. So what you can do is build data models for them so that they can still create visualizations, alerts, and reports in Splunk, but without having to know the nitty-gritty details of Splunk like you do. We actually use data models more often than we think. For example, mathematical formulas are a perfect example of data models. Remember, the formula to find an area of a triangle is area equals 1/2 base times height. And think about it. The data can be totally different for A, B, and H, but the model is how we make sense of the data. We can put in any number for 2 of those 3 variables and solve for the third one, for example. So a data model really is the set of rules that governs how we interact with the data and how the data behaves. It's kind of like stacking Legos in the Splunk world. We stack objects, object constraints, and object attributes, i.e. fields. Objects contain events, searches, and transactions, each with their own proper constraints. And then we add fields, auto-generated from the Splunk engine, lookup tables, eval statements, regular expressions. Let's take a look at objects more closely. Events are the most commonly used type of object. And usually events represent the very first part of a search, i.e. the metadata, also i.e. host equals, source type equals. It's a very broad place to start, and that's good. Searches are more complex than events in that they can contain commands and transformations and things like that. And transactions can combine multiple events from one or many sources into a single event. And now let's take a look at fields. Also object attributes in the data modeling world. They're not tied to a specific object. We can get auto-extracted fields, eval statements, lookup tables, or regular expressions. Data models are extremely powerful in Splunk. And the idea is to have a dedicated team of people that just builds and defines data models for the operational intelligence people. And the operational intelligence people will then use the Splunk pivot tool to build visualizations, alerts, and reports based on the data model that you've already built for them. So you build the underlying structure, the data may change, the rules that govern that data are embedded in your model and ready for the operational intelligence people to use. So let's take a look at building a simple data model in Splunk. To create a data model, on our Splunk search head, we'll go to Settings, Data Models, and we will choose New Data Model. We'll call it something. We'll choose an app context. Doesn't matter too much. I like to go with searching and reporting. Click Create. And now it's going to ask us to start building with those Legos, to start putting in our data sets and our constraints. So first of all, it says to get started, add a data set. Now recall we can start with a root event or a root search. An event is simpler than a search, and usually it's broader than a search, meaning we could do a broad search like host equals or source type equals. And I think it's good to start with that. And let's name our data set my dataset 1, and this is the constraints box, and that is where we will put our search. And we know that we have the homework data set already uploaded into this Splunk instance. and the host value is set to homework. I can click preview here and see that. And there's our homework data set. So let's save that, and notice it put that data set here as one of the building blocks for this data model. And it gave us the original Splunk metadata fields of time, host, source, and source type, and we can add more fields as necessary. But now let's think about the use case for this data model. Let's say that our operational intelligence analysts want a data model that they can put data in and manipulate that deals with backup volume and backup duration. So as the Splunk administrator, or as the data professional in the organization, to build this data model, those are the fields that we want to add, the fields that we believe the analysts will need in this data model. So because this is just a CSV file, all of the fields have been auto-extracted, but we can use an eval expression or a lookup or a regular expression to get the fields that we need. But we already know the fields are auto-extracted. So for backups, I think it's safe to say we would need these two fields. We can look at a sample of the data of any field we're unsure about. Let's include date. And maybe destination IP is important. Let's look at event type. Okay, nothing there. Level. If that relates to backup error messages, then that would be good to include. Physical address looks like machine MAC addresses. The analyst may need that information. Source IP would be good because we have destination IP up here as well. They might need to know what state and a system ID, and we won't worry about these time ones because we can just use the default _time. And type probably has something to do with it as well. Now we can force these columns, these fields, to have different data types, but generally speaking, Splunk selects the best data type for you. Okay, here's our current data model. We can make a more complicated data model if we had more data sets to work with that would be relevant to this data model. In other words, relevant to analyzing backup data. We could add children and other root events as well. So you can see how we build this data model in a hierarchical way. In the next video, we'll look at how to use this data model by accessing the pivot editor right here. So until then, keep splunking, and I really appreciate you staying with me in this course.